were put in place for Miami Beach and Fort Lauderdale, putting limits on businesses and on visitors.
And now Miami-Dade County is putting new restrictions on restaurants.
The U.S. has just shut down parts of Florida. And no, this isn't a precautionary drill. Marine researchers have made a terrifying discovery that has forced authorities to take drastic action. Oceanic sinkholes are opening up beneath the waters of Florida's coast, and they're unlike anything we've seen before. Imagine this: vast, deep voids in the ocean floor, some so massive they could swallow entire buildings. These aren't your typical underwater holes. They're more like giant chasms that stretch hundreds of feet deep and expand with an alarming speed. What started as a routine mapping of the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic has turned into a national crisis. And here's the kicker: these sinkholes are actively destabilizing the very ground beneath Florida, posing a threat that could shake the state's foundation to its core. The shutdown of Miami Beach, Fort Lauderdale, and other coastal zones is not some overblown response. It's a line in the sand. Authorities aren't just reacting to a natural phenomenon. They're taking action against a potentially catastrophic event that could change Florida and the world forever. Before we dive into the terrifying details, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and stay tuned as we explore what these oceanic sinkholes mean for Florida's future, the oceanic ecosystem, and our very understanding of the Earth beneath our feet. It all began with a routine hydrographic mapping project conducted by a team of oceanographers. These researchers were out in the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic waters off Florida's southeastern coast, gathering data about the ocean floor as part of their regular work. They were expecting to find the usual suspects: underwater reefs, natural blue holes, and shifting seabed patterns. What they didn't expect, however, was to stumble upon something that could threaten the very foundations of Florida's coastlines. At first, the researchers believed they had encountered a series of blue holes, deep vertical pits found in underwater carbonate platforms. These types of formations aren't unusual around Florida's coast, so they didn't raise any immediate alarms. But as the team's scans deepened, something startling appeared. The cavities they were tracking weren't typical blue holes. These were massive, unnervingly symmetrical voids, far deeper than anyone had anticipated. Some were stretching hundreds of feet beyond the known seafloor depths, forming a complex system that appeared to be spreading rapidly. What initially seemed like a random anomaly soon became an urgent mystery. The researchers realized they were witnessing a phenomenon unlike anything previously documented. Using remote-operated vehicles, ROVs, they ventured into these sinkholes, and what they found was even more unsettling: evidence of rapid geological collapse, subtle seismic activity, and bizarre acoustic anomalies emanating from deep within the chasms. At first, these scientists assumed the sinkholes were isolated, but further analysis revealed something far more complex. The sinkholes were connected. Satellite imagery and sonar scans from just a year ago showed no signs of these vast cylindrical voids. Now data revealed a growing network of sinkholes, as if the ocean floor was suddenly, and unpredictably, changing its shape. What had once seemed like a routine mapping project was now a full-fledged scientific crisis. The question was no longer, what are these? But rather, what does this mean for Florida? And what are we dealing with beneath the surface? The sinkholes that marine researchers discovered off the coast of Florida are not your typical geological features. They are monstrous, deep, and spreading at a rate that defies normal expectations. These aren't just depressions in the ocean floor. They are vast, cavernous voids that stretch over 1,000 feet in diameter and descend more than 800 feet beneath the ocean's surface. The scale of these sinkholes is unlike anything previously seen in Florida waters. Unlike the more familiar blue holes found around the region, smaller isolated structures often formed by erosion of limestone, these new sinkholes are vast, interconnected systems. Their symmetry is both eerie and alarming. They appear to have formed in a way that suggests an underlying pattern, a design that doesn't fit with the random nature of typical sinkhole creation. Scientists have been stunned by the sheer size and complexity of what they're seeing. The sinkholes are not static. They are actively changing. Some appear to be growing, while others are shifting and merging, creating new openings in the seafloor that weren't there just a year ago. These rapidly forming cavities seem to be connected by fissures, deep cracks running like veins across the ocean floor. The rate at which they are spreading is nothing short of shocking. What was initially thought to be a few isolated sinkholes has evolved into a massive, expanding network of underground chasms that could potentially stretch for miles. The danger posed by these formations goes beyond their size. The geophysical implications are immense. Scientists have detected signs of movement in the surrounding geological structures. Subtle but consistent tremors, likely tied to ongoing shifts deep within the Earth's crust, indicate that the sinkholes could be part of a much larger geological transformation occurring beneath Florida's coastline. If these voids continue to grow, or if they begin to merge, they could destabilize the entire seafloor in unpredictable ways. What started as an ordinary research project has now turned into a desperate race against time. Scientists are scrambling to understand the full scale of the sinkhole network, but each new discovery only raises more questions, and the stakes have never been higher. Florida's coastline is facing a geological crisis that could reshape the region in ways no one could have predicted. The scientific community was initially stunned by the rapid pace at which these sinkholes were appearing. What began as a routine mapping project quickly escalated into a full-scale emergency as the team of oceanographers began to realize the gravity of what they had uncovered. These sinkholes were not only enormous, but also showing signs of active geological collapse, something that was not expected in such a seemingly stable region. Using remote-operated vehicles, ROVs, researchers descended into these deep chasms, hoping to gather more information about their origins. What they found was even more unsettling. Within the sinkholes, they recorded signs of seismic activity, subtle tremors echoing from the very depths of the ocean floor. These tremors suggested that something was stirring deep beneath the Earth's crust. The speed at which the sinkholes were growing and the strange acoustic anomalies emanating from them indicated that this wasn't a normal geological event. It was something entirely new and unprecedented. The most alarming discovery was the realization that these sinkholes were not isolated incidents, but part of a much larger, interconnected system. Satellite images from just a year ago showed no signs of these deep voids, but now, researchers could see a rapidly expanding network of these chasms spreading outward, almost like a web. The sheer size of these formations raised a red flag. Some sinkholes were over 1,000 feet across, and many plunged as deep as 800 feet, far deeper than typical oceanic sinkholes. In response to these findings, federal authorities acted quickly. The U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, NOAA, and the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, were all immediately involved in assessing the situation. The federal government issued a swift shutdown of all marine traffic, research, and construction in the affected areas. This wasn't just a precaution, it was an urgent measure taken to prevent further damage to Florida's coastal infrastructure and marine ecosystems. The initial scientific reactions were a mix of disbelief and concern. No one had anticipated sinkholes of this magnitude forming so rapidly, and the deeper questions about what was causing them were only beginning to unfold. The sinkholes weren't just a geological mystery. They were a ticking time bomb beneath Florida's shores, and scientists were racing to understand how deep the crisis could go. The implications of these oceanic sinkholes go far beyond the immediate threat of a collapsed seabed. Florida's coastal infrastructure is built on a delicate foundation, and the discovery of these vast sinkholes could signal the beginning of a much larger geological disruption. Southern Florida, much of it sitting only a few feet above sea level, is especially vulnerable to any changes in subsurface pressure. The porous limestone foundation on which the state's coastline rests makes it uniquely susceptible to shifts in underground dynamics, especially when you introduce sinkholes of this scale. If these sinkholes continue to grow or shift toward the continental shelf, they could begin to undermine the very foundations of Florida's coastline. Coastal cities like Miami, Tampa, and Fort Lauderdale, which are densely populated and heavily urbanized, are especially at risk. The sinkholes could destabilize the ground beneath these cities, potentially triggering collapses, eroding beaches, or causing land subsidence. The gradual sinking of the earth, putting millions of residents at risk. Already, the sinking of parts of the land has affected infrastructure, from roads to buildings to power lines, and the situation could escalate rapidly if the sinkholes begin to migrate inland. But it's not just human infrastructure that's at risk. The impact on marine ecosystems could be even more catastrophic. These sinkholes are far from inert geological features. They are active zones of change, teeming with unusual chemical and biological activity. Fish populations have begun to shift their migratory patterns, and certain species are disappearing entirely from the area. Nearby coral reefs are showing signs of stress, with mass bleaching events and unusual algae blooms threatening to destabilize delicate marine life. These changes in the marine environment are not just temporary disruptions. They could lead to long-term ecological damage in Florida's waters. What's more, scientists have recorded strange anomalies in the behavior of plankton and other marine organisms. Normally thriving species have begun acting erratically, possibly in response to the altered water chemistry and temperature patterns near the sinkholes. It's clear that these sinkholes are not just reshaping the physical landscape, they're also destabilizing the ecosystems that rely on Florida's marine biodiversity. If the sinkholes continue to expand and merge, their impact on both the human and natural environments could become much more severe. The geological forces at play here are immense, and it's still uncertain whether Florida's coastline will be able to withstand this new wave of geological change. The true scale of the environmental disaster may only become fully visible as scientists continue to monitor the situation. But one thing is clear: Florida's marine landscape is already beginning to change forever. As the sinkholes continue to expand and deepen, a troubling question has emerged. Could this be a symptom of a much larger geophysical disturbance beneath the Earth's crust? While Florida sits far from the edges of major tectonic plates, new data suggests that microplate activity beneath the ocean floor might be at play, possibly reshaping the seabed in ways that were previously undetected. Seismic sensors and geological surveys have picked up low-frequency rumblings beneath the Atlantic Ocean that are typically associated with more active tectonic zones, such as subduction zones or volcanic arcs. These areas are usually found where tectonic plates collide or where molten magma rises toward the surface. The presence of these types of seismic signals, especially in a region considered to be tectonically stable, has led some geologists to speculate that Florida could be sitting on a previously unknown fault line or geological fracture. If this hypothesis proves to be correct, it would fundamentally alter how we understand the geology of North America. Florida, once considered a relatively passive region in terms of seismic activity, could be reclassified as an active seismic zone. This could have wide-reaching implications, from building codes and infrastructure designs to emergency preparedness strategies across the southeastern United States. As the sinkholes continue to grow, these previously stable assumptions about Florida's geology are being called into question, making it a critical area for future research and monitoring. In addition to the potential for tectonic activity, there are growing concerns about the possibility of a much more immediate threat: underwater landslides. If these sinkholes destabilize further, they could trigger underwater seismic shifts that might set off massive landslides on the ocean floor, capable of generating waves large enough to reach the coast. This would create a tsunami-like effect, causing destruction far beyond the already fragile coastal infrastructure. The idea that this phenomenon could signal a shift in Florida's geological stability is not just a theoretical concern, it has profound real-world implications. If Florida's geology is indeed changing at such a fundamental level, it could potentially trigger a chain reaction that would alter the entire eastern seaboard's geological future. What we're witnessing in Florida may just be the first visible signs of a much deeper and more dangerous transformation unfolding beneath the ocean's surface. The discovery of these oceanic sinkholes is already having a profound impact on Florida's economy, and the consequences are only beginning to unfold. Florida is a tourism powerhouse, with its beaches, resorts, and marine activities drawing millions of visitors every year. But with the shutdown of coastal zones like Miami Beach and Fort Lauderdale, the tourism industry is taking a serious hit. Cruise lines have suspended routes, diving tours have been canceled, and recreational fishing and boating activities are now banned. The shutdown has also disrupted Florida's ports, causing a ripple effect throughout the state's economy. Shipping routes are being rerouted, and supply chains are feeling the pressure as key ports like Miami and Jacksonville are forced to close or limit activity. Real estate developers are reevaluating investments, especially those in high-rise beachfront condos. The insurance industry is bracing for a wave of claims related to property damage, and financial institutions are recalculating risk models for coastal properties. which were once considered low risk. On a social level, coastal communities are feeling the strain. Local businesses are struggling, and residents are left wondering what the future holds. Florida's fishing communities, especially, are in limbo, with long-standing livelihoods suddenly disrupted. As the uncertainty grows, the psychological toll on residents and businesses becomes another hidden cost of this emerging crisis. The Oceanic Sinkhole crisis has sparked a cultural shift along Florida's coastline, where residents are beginning to mix folklore with scientific explanations. Local communities, particularly in coastal towns like Key West and Naples, are struggling to grasp the reality of the sinkholes and the looming uncertainty. Fishermen talk about strange occurrences, sonar pings gone awry, nets pulled downward by unknown forces, while others claim to hear odd sounds at night, like deep, resonating hums or muffled booms emanating from the ocean. This sense of unease is being expressed through art and storytelling. Local artists are capturing the eerie stillness of the sea, painting scenes of collapsing seas and swirling vortices beneath boats. Indigenous communities, too, are interpreting the situation through spiritual lenses, invoking ancient stories about the Earth's balance being disrupted. As scientific data leaks into public discussions, the public is increasingly anxious, and Florida's residents now face the unsettling reality that the ocean beneath them is not as stable or predictable as they once believed. As the situation unfolds off Florida's coast, one thing is certain: the consequences of these oceanic sinkholes are far-reaching and still unfolding. What started as a routine scientific study has quickly escalated into a national emergency, and Florida is on the front lines of an environmental and geological crisis. The sinkholes are not just a temporary anomaly. They could signal a deeper, more dangerous transformation beneath the ocean's surface. The fate of Florida's coastal infrastructure, ecosystems, and millions of residents hangs in the balance as scientists continue to study these massive sinkholes. But one thing remains clear: this is a wake-up call to the fragility of the land we live on and the power of the forces beneath us. What do you think? Could this be the beginning of something even bigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay updated on this rapidly evolving situation, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay tuned for more crucial updates.